Can I ask you something? Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every sentence you say about yourself leaves a mark, not on your mind but on your skin. Every time you say, I am not good enough, a small line appears on your hand. Every time you say, I am always unlucky, another mark appears. Every time you say, I am terrible with money, yet another mark appears. At first, you ignore it, but a few weeks later, your hands are covered with marks. Now imagine meeting someone for the first time. They don't ask your name, they simply look at your hands. They already know the story you've been telling yourself. Sounds impossible? Maybe. But here is what isn't impossible. Because every single day your brain is keeping a record of those same sentences. Not on your skin, but inside your identity, and that's far more important and far more lethal. Because identity quietly influences the choices you make long before you realize you are making them. A few months ago, I asked a coaching client one question. Without thinking too much, finish this sentence, I am. And she answered immediately, spontaneously, I'm always anxious. I asked, since when? She looked at me, paused and smiled, then said something I'll never forget. She said, honestly, I don't know. I've always just said that. That answer stayed with me for days. Not because she was unusual, but because I realized most of us don't choose our identities, we inherit them. From one difficult year, one careless comment, one teacher, one relationship, one failure, and then we keep repeating those words until they sound like truth to us. Now I'll give you the library story. Imagine walking into the world's largest library, millions of books, every subject you can imagine. And as you walk in, the librarian asks only one question: which story would you like to borrow? You pick one, you read it, return home. Tomorrow, you borrow the same story again. The next day, the same one. A year later, the same one. Eventually, you know every page by heart. Now, here is the interesting question. Did the story become true, or did it simply become familiar? I think many of us are reading the same book about ourselves every day. I am not confident. I am always behind. I am just an ordinary person. I am not creative. We have read those pages so often that we've stopped asking who wrote the book and whether that is the truth or not. There's something fascinating about the human brain. It likes efficiency. Once it thinks it understands who you are, it stops questioning that picture. It just loves familiarity. It just loves your logic. It doesn't want to defy you. Think about meeting someone new. Within a few conversations, your mind starts building an impression about that person. Friendly, quiet, funny, serious. And here is the surprising part. Your brain does exactly the same with you. It builds a picture using the words you repeat, the choices you make, and the behaviors you practice. That's why identity isn't created in one dramatic moment. It is created quietly. Ordinary day after ordinary day, one repeated sentence at a time. Now, let me ask you yet another thing. Have you ever stayed in a hotel? When you check in, you are handed a room key. Maybe it says room number 512. For 2 days, everyone calls you by that room number 512. Then you check out. You give the key back. Life moves on. Now, imagine refusing to return the key. 20 years later, you are still introducing yourself as I am room number 512. Sounds ridiculous, isn't it? But many of us do exactly that with old identities. One failed exam, I am not intelligent. One heartbreak, I am difficult to love. One business loss, I am terrible with money. Those experiences were rooms, not your home. Yet somewhere along the way we forgot to hand the key back. This is where two simple words enter the conversation. Not as a magic, not as a ritual, but as a mirror. And those words are I am. Every time you say those words, you are answering the oldest question in human history. Who am I? And if you answer it the same way day after day, year after year, your brain gradually stops treating it as an opinion. It starts treating it as your identity. Not because it's true, but again because it is familiar. Now here is the beautiful part. If familiarity can be learned, it can also be changed. But it can be changed with one conscious decision repeated consistently. And that's exactly what I'll show you next. Because before you can build a different future, you have to stop introducing yourself to your own mind as the person you are trying to leave behind. Now, before we go ahead, can I ask you for one small favor? Don't comment what you want to become. Instead, finish this sentence honestly. For years, I've been saying maybe it is I'm always stressed, I'm not enough, I'm always late. No judgment, just awareness. Sometimes the moment we notice the story is the moment we stop being controlled by it. And if this conversation is making you look at yourself differently, subscribe to Diviine Gracia. Every week we are going to question ideas we have accepted for years and replace them with ones that help us live more consciously. So yes, now let's go to the second part. Can I tell you something again which I noticed about airports? That whenever you board a flight, there is one thing nobody questions, your destination. If your boarding pass says New York, nobody expects the plane to land in Paris. The destination follows the ticket. Life works in a surprisingly similar way. Your choices, your habits, even your expectation often follow the identity you've been carrying. That's why two people can face the exact same opportunity and see completely different things. One person sees possibility, other sees risk. One says, I'll give it a try, the other quietly thinks, people like me don't do things like that. Same opportunity, different identity, which leads to different decision and different future. Not because one person was born lucky, but because they were traveling with a different inner passport. Now, I will talk a little bit about this invisible passport. Imagine someone who handed you a passport the day you were born. Not with your nationality, but with your identity. Inside it were statements like, I am always chosen, I am easy to love, I am capable of learning, or maybe another one, I am never enough, I always get left behind, I don't deserve success. Now imagine you've been showing that passport to life every single day, not physically, but through your decisions. When a new opportunity appears, which passport are you presenting? The one that says I'll probably fail, or the other one that says I can learn? So here's the beautiful part. Unlike a real passport, this one can be renewed. Okay, so change your passport before it's too late. Now, have you ever stood in a valley or an empty building and heard your own voice come back to you? That's an echo. We all know about it. Life sometimes feels similar. Not because the world is repeating your words, but because your identity influences what you notice, expect, and respond to. If you spend years believing nobody appreciates me, your attention naturally notices every sign that seems to confirm it. If you believe people are generally kind, you will notice very different moments. The world has not changed, your attention has, and attention is powerful because wherever attention goes, behavior usually follows. So, why change feels so uncomfortable? Here is something I wish someone had explained to me again many years ago. Growth often feels unfamiliar before it feels exciting. Let's say you have always described yourself as someone who avoids difficult conversations, and one day you finally speak honestly. How do you think you will feel? Confident? Probably not. You'll probably feel awkward, uncomfortable, maybe even guilty. Many people think those feelings mean I'm doing something wrong. What if they actually mean I'm doing something new? That's an important difference. Your comfort zone isn't always the place where your best life exists. It's simply the place your brain knows well. Now imagine standing on one side of a river. On this side is the person you have been. Across the river is the person you are becoming. Between the two there is a bridge. Most people stand at the beginning of that bridge saying, I'll cross when I feel ready. But bridges aren't crossed by feelings. They are crossed by footsteps. One step, then another. You don't need confidence to take the first step. You need willingness. Confidence often arrives halfway across. I would like to give you a different way of thinking about change. Forget trying to become a completely new person overnight. Instead, imagine that every decision you make is a vote. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, one vote. Every time you choose honesty instead of pretending, one vote. Every time you learn instead of giving up, one vote. One vote doesn't decide an election, but thousands of votes do. So identity also works the same way. You don't become disciplined because you made one good decision. You become disciplined because you keep casting votes for that version of yourself, day after day, quietly and consistently. Now I'm going to share with you a question that changed me. For years I asked, how can I change my life? Now I ask something very different. What kind of person would naturally create the life I am hoping for? That question changed everything, my dear friends, because suddenly I stopped chasing outcomes and I started practicing qualities: patience, integrity, courage, curiosity, responsibility. Those qualities don't guarantee a particular result, but they change the way you move through the world, and over time, becomes changes what becomes possible. So today's experiment, what I'm going to tell you to do is that tomorrow, before you make your first important decision, pause for just 10 seconds and ask yourself, which version of me is about to make this choice? The fearful version, the impatient version, or the confident version, the compassionate version? Don't try to be perfect. Just become aware, because awareness creates choice, and choice is where change begins. In the next part, I want to take you somewhere even deeper. We are finally going to explore what many spiritual traditions have meant by living from a higher state of being. Not an escape from reality, but as a way of meeting reality differently. And you will discover why the words I am may be less about changing the universe, it is more about changing the person who is experiencing it. So, yeah, thank you for being with me in this part 2. Let's start on to part 3. And thanks again for being consistent and persistent. So we have spent this entire conversation talking about identity, not because identity is fashionable, but because identity quietly sits behind almost every decision you make. Now I would like you to take you one step deeper. Have you ever noticed that there are two versions of you? That there is a version that reacts and there is a version that observes. One gets angry immediately, the other notices the anger. One panics, the other says take a breath. One wants to quit, the other whispers just take the next step. If you have experienced that, then you have already met both parts of yourself. The question is, which one have you been listening to more often? So many people hear the phrase God state and imagine something mysterious, something only a few people can reach. But I would like to offer you another way of looking at it. What if the God state isn't about becoming someone supernatural? What if it's about becoming more deeply aligned with the highest qualities already available to you? Think about the people you admire most, not because they are famous, but because of who they are. Maybe they are calm under pressure, maybe they are deeply compassionate, maybe they are honest even when it's difficult, maybe they forgive quickly, maybe they keep their word. When you are around them, you feel different. Why? Because character has a quiet influence. Perhaps living from a higher state simply means asking yourself, which part of me am I choosing to strengthen today? Fear or courage, resentment or forgiveness, scarcity or generosity, judgment or understanding. These choices don't happen once. They happen dozens of times every day. And imagine two gardens. One is filled with flowers, the other is filled with weeds. Every morning you receive one bucket of water. You can't water both equally. Whichever garden receives your attention grows. Our inner world works in a similar way. Every time you feed bitterness, it grows. Every time you practice gratitude, that grows. Every time you rehearse self-respect, that becomes stronger. Attention is like water. It doesn't argue. It simply nourishes whatever you keep returning to. So the question isn't what do I want to grow? The real question is, what am I watering every day? So remember that. Every time, every situation, every day, whenever you react, think, what am I watering now? What am I watering every day? And with this, I would like to leave you with a practice that has become part of my own life. Every evening, before I sleep, I ask myself 3 questions. Where did I act from fear? Where did I act from fear today? Where did I act from my higher self? And tomorrow, where do I want one more opportunity to practice? Because no musician becomes extraordinary after one lesson. No athlete becomes great after one workout. Character is built the same way, through practice. The real meaning of I am is maybe their greatest power. It isn't they magically change the world. Maybe the greatest power is that they remind us to choose who we are becoming. Every time you say I'm patient, ask yourself, how can I practice patience today? If you say I'm becoming courageous, look for one courageous conversation that day. If you say I'm compassionate, find one opportunity to show compassion. Now your words and your action, then they begin working together. And that's where the change becomes real, because you are converting your word into action. So your brain is finding evidence and inculcating that into your consciousness, into your identity. Now I would like you to invite you to a 7-day ritual, 7-day challenge, in fact, not a ritual. For the next 7 mornings before you touch your phone, before the world fills your mind with headlines, notifications, and opinions, sit quietly for 1 minute. Finish this sentence. Today I'm choosing to be not who you were yesterday, not who someone else expects you to be, but who you consciously choose to practice today. Then before you sleep, ask yourself, did I live one moment from that identity? Even if the answer is only once, that's some progress. And progress has a remarkable way of becoming momentum. So before we leave, I don't know where you are in your life today. Maybe things are going well. Maybe you are carrying a burden nobody else knows about. Maybe you are rebuilding after disappointment. Maybe you are starting again. Whatever your situation, please remember this. One difficult chapter doesn't have the authority to write your entire story. One mistake does not define your identity, and one opinion doesn't determine your worth. Your future is not decided by the labels you have repeated for years. It's shaped by the person you quietly choose to become, one ordinary day at a time. So tomorrow morning, before the world tells you who you should be, pause, take one slow breath, finish one sentence, I am. Then make one choice that proves those words are more than hope. They are becoming your way of living. If this conversation spoke to you, I would love to know. Write these 4 words in comments. I choose consciously today. If you know someone who's forgotten who they really are, share this conversation with them. And if you enjoy these honest conversations that blend psychology, practical wisdom, and thoughtful spirituality, subscribe to Diviine Gracia. Next time, we are going to explore one question that quietly shapes every relationship in your life. Why do we keep becoming the people we promised we would never be? Until then, take care of yourself, and remember, the most important introduction you will ever make is the one you make to yourself every single day.